It was just after breakfast. My mom was staring at her teacup, but squinting as if the letters had started to fade. Aging doesn't always take your memory. Sometimes it dims the light in your eyes, slowly, quietly. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a daughter who nearly missed the signs hidden in something as simple as a bowl of vegetables. Here's what I discovered and the changes we made before it was too late. At first, I just thought my mom's eyes were getting tired. She was 73, still sharp, still active, but sometimes she'd lean closer to the newspaper or ask me what the clock said. I didn't worry, not really, because she ate well, lots of greens, home-cooked meals, not much sugar. But then I started noticing a pattern. She avoided going outside on sunny days. Her eyes watered when she cut vegetables. She began sitting further away from the television. And sometimes she didn't even recognize the food on her plate. That's when I started paying closer attention. And what I discovered surprised me. In this video, I'll share the 5 vegetables that were silently affecting her eyesight, and the 4 simple ones that helped her see clearly again. If someone you love is over 60, this might be the most important story you hear today. Part 1. The day her eyes changed. It happened on a morning like any other. The sun had just begun to peek through the curtains, casting soft golden light on the kitchen tiles. My mother was sitting at the table with her usual cup of warm tea. She reached out to grab it, held it in both hands, and stared at the words printed on the porcelain. Then she squinted. Not a big squint, just a small, subtle narrowing of the eyes, but enough for me to notice. She brought the cup a little closer to her face, tilted it slightly, and blinked a few times, as if trying to bring the letters into focus. I asked her if something was wrong. She smiled, waved her hand gently, and said, "Maybe I just didn't sleep well." But I knew that smile. It was the kind she wore when she didn't want to worry me. Later that day, she was peeling carrots for lunch. She stopped halfway and asked if I could help. The light was too harsh, she said, the same light we'd cooked under for years. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her sleeve. I noticed her blinking more than usual, a kind of quiet struggle in her gaze. At first, I told myself it was nothing. After all, she wasn't using her phone much. She hadn't read a long book in a while. There was no reason for her eyes to be strained. And besides, she was 73. Maybe this was just part of getting older. But something about it stayed with me. That night, as I was washing the dishes, I kept thinking about that moment. The way she had squinted at her teacup. The way she asked me to finish the carrots. Not because her hands were tired, but because her eyes couldn't bear the light. A quiet thought crept into my mind. What if it wasn't just age? What if something else was slowly dimming her sight? The next morning, I watched her more carefully. She turned her face slightly away from the window while drinking her soup. She flinched a little when she opened the fridge and the light came on. And when I handed her a note with the shopping list, she held it at arm's length, then brought it close again, then finally gave up and asked me to read it for her. It was like watching someone gently lose the outlines of the world, not all at once, but one soft edge at a time. I sat down that evening and began to write down everything I had noticed, not to panic myself, just to track it. A list of small things, all pointing in the same direction. What was changing, and why she was still eating well. Her meals were simple, mostly vegetables, boiled greens, clear soups, no processed food, no sugar, no screens. But the more I thought about it, the more a strange thought returned. What if it wasn't what she avoided that mattered? What if it was what she kept eating every day? There's something comforting about familiar meals. The same bowl of vegetable soup she had made for years. The same warm broth with dendo from the garden. The same habit of saving leftovers from dinner to reheat in the morning. It felt safe. It felt right. But sometimes the things we do out of love and routine are the very things that quietly betray us. That's when I started reading. Not just recipes or nutrition tips. I dug deeper. Medical journals, caregiver forums, notes from doctors who specialized in senior vision loss. And that's when I found something that stopped me cold. Certain leafy greens, especially when cooked and stored overnight, begin to produce compounds that are harmful to the eyes. Nitrites, a word I had barely paid attention to before. A word that sounded scientific and distant. But now, it felt personal. Because I had just reheated a bowl of leftover soup that morning, and it had dendo in it. I learned that when vegetables like red amaranth are cooked and left overnight, the natural nitrates in them can convert to nitrites. And nitrites, when accumulated over time, can quietly damage the small blood vessels in the eyes. Not in one big moment, but over weeks, months. They can interfere with the flow of oxygen to the retina. And in elderly eyes, already fragile, that's more than enough to begin a slow decline. The scary part, it doesn't cause pain. There's no redness, no dramatic symptom, just a steady fading, a gentle dimming of light, a narrowing of the visual world. I found one study that explained this clearly. In older adults, regular intake of reheated nitrate-rich vegetables was linked to early onset retinal microvascular damage, a quiet form of degeneration that often goes unnoticed until it is too late. I sat back and looked at the list I had written down. Squinting, avoiding light, watery eyes not recognizing food, looking away from the window, blaming the brightness. It was all there. And suddenly, that small squint over a teacup didn't feel small anymore. I didn't tell her right away. I didn't want to alarm her, but I quietly began changing our routine. No more reheated greens. No more storing soups overnight. I added a little lemon to fresh vegetables, made smaller portions, cooked only what we needed. She didn't notice at first, but a few days later, she looked up from her bowl and said, "The light feels softer today." That's when I knew we were onto something. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with medicine. It begins with noticing. And in the next part, I'll share the moment I realized we weren't just dealing with age. We were dealing with something deeper, something sitting right on our dinner table all along. Part 2. When healthy habits betray us. I used to believe that healthy eating was simple. Just cook at home, avoid processed food, eat lots of vegetables. My mom followed that formula almost religiously. Every morning there would be a bowl of steamed greens on the table. Mung toi rao, muang kai song, gently cooked, lightly salted, and sometimes she'd say proudly, "We don't need medicine, we've got vegetables." I believed her, until the day I realized that even the best habits can quietly work against us when they're not done right. You see, my mother was not someone careless about her health. She avoided sugar. She drank plenty of warm water. She rarely even touched her phone. But she had one habit that seemed harmless, even admirable. She saved everything. Leftover soup. Into the fridge. A few stems of mong toi, not eaten at dinner. She would reheat them the next morning, and if we didn't finish them, they might show up again in lunch. It was her way of not wasting food, and I respected that. But one morning, I watched her reheat a bowl of leftover greens. As she stirred the pot, I noticed a smell I hadn't noticed before. Slightly sour, slightly metallic. Faint, but there. She didn't notice it. She added a little salt and sat down to eat. That's when it clicked. Maybe this wasn't just about nitrates and reheating. Maybe there was something deeper going on in the way we prepared and preserved food. I started to pay attention to more than just what she ate. I paid attention to how she ate. When she cooked, what she paired things with, how long food sat in the fridge before it reached her plate again. And then one evening, as she was finishing a plate of rau muong sang with bun cha, she winced slightly. Not from pain, just a brief discomfort behind her eyes. I asked if she was okay. She rubbed her temples and said, "It feels like sand in my eyes today. Maybe just the weather." But it wasn't the weather, because it happened again a few days later. And again. That's when I started digging into raw greens, specifically rau muong, a vegetable we had trusted for years. What I found was something I wish I had known earlier. Raw water spinach, especially if not washed carefully, can carry tiny parasites. Liver flukes, microorganisms too small to see but powerful enough to inflame the tiny blood vessels in the eyes. A study published by a medical research group in Southeast Asia showed a connection between consuming raw aquatic vegetables and recurring eye irritation in the elderly. Symptoms like eye itchiness, tearing, mild swelling, and even blurred vision, especially when immune function starts to decline with age. And what's worse, these symptoms don't show up like a big illness. They hide in small discomforts. A day of eye strain, a bit of redness, a watery blink. We had blamed it on screen time, on old age, on dry weather. But it was right there in her lunch. That realization left me feeling both grateful and ashamed. Grateful that we caught it before it got worse. Ashamed that we had called it just age for so long. I sat with her the next morning as she looked out the window. I asked if she had ever felt like her eyes were worse after certain meals. She paused, then nodded. Slowly. "Sometimes after that cold salad with raw rau muong," she said. "I feel heavy. Not tired. Just off. Like the light is too sharp, and everything around me is moving too fast." She didn't know how else to explain it, but I understood. It was a kind of sensory fatigue, and it made me wonder how many other healthy habits we had trusted, never realizing their quiet effects. We switched things slowly. I stopped serving raw greens. I replaced them with lightly sautéed or steamed vegetables. I rinsed everything twice, sometimes 3 times, and I noticed that her eyes stopped tearing in the morning. She no longer turned away from the sunlight. She looked at me with more clarity, more steadiness. But I didn't stop there, because that discovery about reheated den do and raw rau muong opened a door. A quiet but urgent question. What else have we trusted for years, that may not be as harmless as we think. That's when I remembered another habit of hers: buying greens from the market, especially kaisang, often on sale, often slightly wilted, still green, but soft, moist, packed in tight plastic bags. She'd bring them home, wash them, and cook them that evening. But I had seen something once in a food safety article about wilted leafy greens, how when stored in humid conditions, especially in plastic without airflow, they can develop invisible mold. Not just the kind that causes spoilage, but the kind that produces neurotoxins, subtle chemicals that inflame blood vessels and nerves, especially in sensitive organs like the brain and the eyes. I didn't want to believe it, so I did the test myself. I took a few leaves of kaisang from the fridge, ones that had been stored overnight in a bag. I looked closely. There was no visible mold, but the smell was musty, a little off. I threw them out, and from that day, I promised myself only fresh, only crisp, never packed tight, never stored long, because the cost of saving a few cents was far too high. And what I learned next, it didn't come from a study. It came from my mother's voice, the day she told me that everything looked a little brighter, that the light no longer made her flinch, that the colors on her plate felt warmer, that she could read the word green tea on her cup again. That was when I knew we had uncovered something real. But I wasn't done, because the deeper I looked, the more I found. More vegetables we had trusted, more invisible risks, and one particular item in her fridge that nearly broke my heart. In the next part, I'll tell you what it was, and why it scared me more than anything else we'd discovered. Part 3. I started connecting the dots. There was something about that week that changed the way I saw everything. It wasn't dramatic, nothing sudden, no emergency, just a growing string of tiny observations that began to feel too connected to ignore. My mom had started sitting in a different chair at dinner, one further from the overhead light. She turned the brightness down on her phone, even though she rarely used it. She paused more often while cooking, as if she needed to reorient herself in the kitchen. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe the weather had changed. Maybe it was just a bad week. But the pattern kept growing. One afternoon, she opened the fridge to take out a small jar. I saw her hand reach for it, then hesitate. She held it close to her face for a few seconds. Then she set it down and called me over. "Can you check if this is still good?" she asked. I can't tell. It was a jar of old-style pickled radish, a kind of salty white kukai moi she had eaten since she was a child. Crunchy, sharp, comforting. She ate it every day, sometimes as a side, sometimes just with rice. And that was the moment the final puzzle piece clicked into place. We had removed the reheated greens, stopped eating raw vegetables, switched to fresh produce. But something was still lingering. That something was right in that little jar. I had read about fermented foods before, how they could be beneficial when prepared properly, but also how when consumed daily and in large amounts, they could become a hidden source of harm, especially for seniors. Pickled radish, when preserved in excess salt and kept for long periods, begins to develop high levels of sodium nitrite, Combined with already existing nitrates in the body, these can damage the tiny blood vessels in the eyes. But even more concerning, they can slowly raise intraocular pressure. And in older adults, especially women, that pressure can be a silent thief, a risk factor for glaucoma, for optic nerve damage, for vision that narrows and fades without warning. I had never imagined that a simple side dish could play such a role, but there it was, in her daily meals, again and again. And the symptoms made sense now. The dry eyes, the dull headaches, the slight dizziness. Not always enough to complain about, but just enough to wear her down. She had even started avoiding reading the newspaper. She said the letters felt too small, but when I gave her a larger print version, she still squinted. I sat across from her that evening, watching her quietly eat her dinner. One bite of rice, one slice of pickled radish. Her face calm, peaceful, but I knew something was shifting beneath the surface. And suddenly I felt a deep ache, not just for her, but for all the small things we never questioned. All the food we called harmless just because we grew up with it, because it felt familiar, because it reminded us of home. I looked back at the last few weeks and began to see the web more clearly. The leftover greens, the raw spinach, the wilted leafy bags, the pickled radish, all connected, not by coincidence, but by culture, by habit, by love. And that was the hardest part to accept, that even love, when uninformed, can quietly lead us away from health. I didn't throw out the radish that night. I wasn't ready, neither was she. But I did something small. The next day, I didn't serve it. Instead, I gave her a few slices of steamed carrot with olive oil, lightly seasoned, bright in color. She looked at me with mild surprise. "No pickles today," she asked. "Let's take a break," I said. "Just for a few days. See how it feels." She nodded, took a bite of carrot, and smiled. "You know this tastes softer than I thought," she said. I smiled back and quietly marked that day in my journal. That was the first day without pickled radish in her diet. And something began to shift. The next morning, she got up and opened the curtains fully. Let the light in. No flinch, no squint, just a deep breath and a long stare out at the garden. By the end of the week, she said something that made me stop in my tracks. "I feel less foggy, not just in my eyes, in my head too." That was when I knew. Her sight wasn't the only thing that had been fading. Her clarity, her rhythm, her presence, it had all dimmed just a little in ways we never thought to question. And now, it was returning, gently, one meal at a time. But I didn't want to just take things away from her. I wanted to give something back, so I began searching again. But this time, not for dangers. I searched for protectors, foods that nourish, vegetables that heal, that feed the eyes, the heart, the mind. I was tired of fear. I wanted light. And what I found next changed everything. Because the same kitchen that had once dimmed her vision also held the key to restoring it. And in the next part, I'll tell you what I discovered. 4 simple vegetables that helped my mother see clearly again. And maybe they might do the same for someone you love too. Part 4. 5 foods that slowly stole her sight. When I laid everything out on paper, the pattern became undeniable. It wasn't one food. It wasn't one moment. It was a gentle layering, a soft, daily rhythm of choices that seemed harmless, but slowly dimmed the light in her eyes. I stared at the list. 5 foods, 5 habits, 5 quiet steps away from clarity. And the most painful part, each of them was something I had prepared for her with love. The first was red amaranth, or what we called dendo. We thought it was the perfect green, soft, easy to digest, mild in taste, and when boiled, it gave the broth a beautiful pink hue. My mom loved it. But what I didn't know, what no one had told us, is that red amaranth is naturally high in nitrates, which when freshly cooked and eaten immediately are beneficial. They help blood vessels relax, lower blood pressure, support circulation. But when left overnight, something changes. The nitrates begin to convert into nitrites, and nitrites, especially in older adults, can become toxic in accumulation. They interfere with oxygen flow in the blood. They damage the delicate vessels that nourish the retina. And unlike sharp pain or dizziness, this kind of damage creeps in silently. It shows up as slight blurriness, a need to squint, a struggle with bright light. All things my mom had begun to experience. I remember the morning I poured out the leftover soup with red amaranth. I stood by the sink, tears welling up, not because of the waste, but because I realized that something I had thought was good might have been hurting her for years. The second was raw water spinach. We called it rau muong song. It was a staple in our summer meals. Crisp, cool, a perfect side to a warm bowl of noodles. But raw greens, especially those grown in aquatic environments, are often home to microscopic parasites. One of the most common is the liver fluke, which can survive in underwashed vegetables. In small amounts, our bodies can fight them off. But in elderly individuals, the immune response is slower, weaker. These parasites don't just affect the liver. They can cause inflammation in microvessels, especially those in the eyes. And it matched her symptoms. The watering, the redness, the vague itchiness that came and went. We had blamed it on allergies, on dust, on age. But it was in her salad all along. The third food was something we never questioned: wilted mustard greens or kaisong, often sold at the market in plastic bags, slightly soft damp from the morning air. My mom would bring them home, wash them carefully, and cook them that evening. But what we didn't know is that when leafy greens are bruised or wilted, especially in plastic packaging, they become breeding grounds for invisible mold. Not the kind you see, but the kind that releases mycotoxins, compounds that can affect nerve health, blood vessels, and most alarmingly, the optic nerve. These toxins don't make you vomit. They don't cause fever. They cause fatigue, eye strain, mental fog, all the things that had slowly become normal for her. The fourth was the one that broke me. Pickled radish, ku kai moi. It was her favorite. She ate it every single day, salty, crunchy, a taste of childhood. But I learned that in traditionally fermented vegetables, especially those kept for long periods in salty brine, the accumulation of sodium and nitrites can quietly raise intraocular pressure. Not enough to feel, but enough to damage. The retina is delicate, the optic nerve even more so. And in older adults, high sodium can disrupt fluid balance in the eye, leading to blurred vision, headaches, and in some cases, irreversible optic nerve damage. I couldn't look at that jar the same way again. And the fifth was one we had always thought was cooling and gentle. Malabar spinach. We called it mong toi. My mom loved it in soup, especially with crab or shrimp. It felt comforting familiar. But mong toi is rich in oxalates. Oxalates, when consumed in excess, can bind to calcium and prevent absorption of other crucial nutrients like zinc and vitamin A. Two nutrients essential for eye health. Over time, this deficiency doesn't cause pain. It causes subtle changes. Dry eyes, trouble adjusting to light, difficulty reading. Things my mom had quietly accepted as normal. But they weren't normal. They were signs. 5 vegetables, all healthy in the right context, all dangerous when used the wrong way. Not because they were bad, but because we didn't know better. I looked back at my mother's meals. A bowl of reheated dendo soup, a plate of rao muang song next to bun cha, kai sung stored in plastic cooked after sitting a day, pickled radish served with nearly every meal, mong toi soup thick and reheated again, and I saw it, not just a diet, but a quiet pattern of unknowing harm. And the hardest part, she trusted me to cook those meals, but I had never questioned them. Until now. I didn't confront her. I didn't want to shame her or take away what brought her comfort. Instead, I began replacing. Gently, thoughtfully. I started searching for vegetables that nourished the eyes, that supported blood flow, that restored what had been lost. And I found them. Bright, simple, easy to prepare. And in the next part, I'll tell you what they were. The 4 humble vegetables that brought the light back to her eyes, and maybe to her spirit too. Part 5. What helped her see again? I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but sometimes healing doesn't begin with a doctor's visit. Sometimes it begins in the kitchen. I had spent so many nights researching the foods we once trusted, the vegetables we had loved, and now I was searching for something new, something we could add, not just take away, and I found it. 4 humble ingredients, not exotic, not expensive, but deeply nourishing, especially for older eyes. The first was carrot. It felt almost too simple, too obvious. But when I looked closer, I realized just how powerful this everyday root truly was. Carrots are rich in beta-carotene, a pigment that gives them their bright orange color. But inside the body, beta-carotene transforms into vitamin A, and vitamin A is the lifeline of the retina. Without it, the eyes cannot adjust to light changes. The cells responsible for night vision become weak. The surface of the eye dries out, leading to discomfort and blurred sight. That was exactly what my mom had been going through. So I started small. I grated carrots into her morning porridge. I added them to soups, served them raw with hummus, and within a week, she said something I'll never forget. The sunlight doesn't sting as much anymore. That was the first sign. The second vegetable I introduced was red bell pepper. At first, she raised her eyebrows. It looked too bright, too unfamiliar. She said, "Isn't that spicy?" I laughed. No, not at all. Red bell peppers are rich in both vitamin A and vitamin C. Vitamin A protects the retina. Vitamin C strengthens the blood vessels that feed the eyes. Together, they reduce the risk of macular degeneration and eye fatigue. But there was something else. Red bell peppers are also packed with antioxidants, especially lutein and zeaxanthin, two compounds found in the macula of the eye responsible for central vision. I sautéed them lightly with olive oil and garlic. She loved the taste, bright, sweet, gentle. She said it reminded her of food from her younger days. Simple, clean, alive. The third vegetable was kale. Now, kale wasn't something we ate growing up. It sounded foreign, a bit trendy, but I couldn't ignore the research. Kale is a powerhouse of lutein and zeaxanthin, even more than red bell peppers. It also contains vitamin K, which supports blood flow to the eyes, and magnesium, which reduces pressure inside the eye. A silent factor in age-related vision loss. I blended it into a smoothie with banana and almond milk. Added a little honey. She was hesitant at first, but she drank it, and by the third time, she was asking for it herself. That was when I knew something was changing, not just in her body, but in her trust. And the fourth, the one that felt the most familiar, was ripe tomato. We had always used tomatoes in cooking, but never really paid attention to them until I learned about lycopene, a powerful antioxidant found in tomatoes, especially when ripe. Lycopene helps protect the eyes from oxidative stress. It slows the progression of cataracts and supports healthy blood flow to the retina, but only if the tomatoes are fresh, ripe, not overcooked. I began serving them raw, sliced, a sprinkle of sea salt, a drizzle of olive oil. She would bite into them with a soft crunch. Juice would run down her fingers, and she would smile. "These remind me of my childhood," she said. "The garden behind our old house. The red ones were always sweeter." Day by day, meal by meal, I watched her change. Her eyes no longer looked tired by noon. She sat closer to the window again. She read the newspaper without squinting. She called me one morning and said, "The flowers outside are so colorful today." They had always been colorful, but now she could truly see them. And maybe more importantly, she felt like seeing them. That spark, that presence, it had started to return, and I understood something deeper. This was never just about the eyes. It was about energy, about clarity, about joy. Food wasn't just medicine. It was memory. It was meaning. And when chosen well, it could bring someone back to themselves. My mother had once quietly faded into the background of her days, but now she was leaning in. She was noticing things again. The little freckles on her teacup, the birds on the balcony, the pattern on her old tablecloth. The kind of things you only see when your eyes feel safe. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she said something that made my throat tighten. "I feel like myself again." All it took was 4 vegetables, simple, available, known, but used with care. I didn't need a miracle. I just needed the truth. And I wanted to share that truth with others. Because if someone you love is quietly fading behind tired eyes, maybe this could help them too. But the story doesn't end there, because the real moment, the one that moved me most, was still to come. In the final part, I'll tell you about the morning I looked at her, and she truly saw me again. Part 6. The morning she saw my face. Clearly, it was a Sunday morning, the kind where everything feels still. The light came through the window, softly filtering through the lace curtain, casting quiet patterns on the kitchen floor. My mother was already at the table, sipping her tea, her back straight, her shoulders relaxed. I walked in with sleepy eyes and a gentle yawn. And then she looked up at me. She didn't just glance. She looked right into my face, and she said, "Your eyes look brighter today." I stood still because I realized, for weeks, maybe months, she hadn't truly looked at me like that. Not with focus, not with recognition that felt complete. But now her gaze was steady, clear, present, and something in me softened. As if a part of her I had been missing quietly returned without announcement. I sat down across from her, asked how she slept. She smiled and said I woke up early. I wanted to watch the sky change colors. She had always loved the sunrise, but for a long time she had stopped going to the window. It felt too bright, she once said, too sharp. But that morning she had gone back to the light, and I realized this wasn't just about vision. It was about confidence. When she couldn't see clearly, she began pulling away from the world. She sat further from the TV. She stopped reading the newspaper. She hesitated to walk outside alone, but now she was rejoining her life. That same day, she helped me peel vegetables. She read a recipe aloud. She even spotted a small stain on my shirt and laughed gently as she pointed it out. The little things, the things we forget to cherish until they slip away. Later that evening, I sat on the balcony while she watered her plants. I thought about everything we had done. Removing the leftover soups, replacing raw greens with gently cooked ones, letting go of the pickled radish, bringing in carrots, peppers, kale, tomatoes, tiny decisions, none of them dramatic, all of them consistent. And together, they had opened a path back to clarity, not just for her, but for me too. Because in helping her, I began to see how easily we accept decline, how often we tell ourselves that fading is just part of aging. But what if it's not? What if some of it is preventable? What if some of it is reversible? I'm not a doctor. I'm just a daughter. A daughter who saw her mother slip slowly into shadows she didn't deserve, and who chose to look closer. Not to fix everything, just to care enough to ask why. Why the light hurt her eyes. Why her voice grew softer. Why her steps became slower. And in asking those questions, I found hope. It wasn't hidden in a pill bottle. It was in a bowl of warm carrot soup, in a glass of kale smoothie, in a fresh tomato sliced with love. It was in the meals we shared, in the mornings we began to reclaim. Sometimes we think healing needs to be big, loud, scientific. But sometimes healing looks like your mother noticing your eyes again, or smiling at the sunlight instead of turning away, or saying, "I feel more awake today." Those are the victories no chart can measure. But they matter. They matter deeply. So, if you've noticed someone you love is slowly turning their face from the light, if they squint a little more than before, if they don't quite recognize their favorite books or the colors on the curtains, don't wait. Start small. Look at their meals. Look at their habits. Look at the foods they think are safe. Because sometimes what we call comfort is quietly taking something precious away. And sometimes what we think is simple is enough to bring it back. That morning, when my mom looked at me and said, "Your eyes look brighter today," I smiled. But inside, I whispered something even softer. "No, Mom. It's yours that shine again." And that is the real gift. The one we give each other when we choose to care just a little more than yesterday. They say eyesight fades with age, but I don't believe that anymore. Because I've seen what happens when we look a little closer. When we stop accepting decline as fate and start asking gentle questions. Not just what to take away, but what to give back. Your strength didn't leave you. It just needs the right kind of care to come back. Maybe clarity doesn't arrive like thunder. Maybe it tiptoes in quietly. On a soft morning. In the steam of warm soup. In the color of a ripe tomato. In the light that finally feels gentle again. What I've learned is this. We don't have to wait until something breaks to begin healing. We can start with something small. One vegetable, one habit, one choice made with love. And if this story reminded you of someone you care about, someone who's been turning away from the light little by little, don't wait. Send this to them. Help them feel strong again. Help them feel seen again. I've also made a playlist about gentle morning routines for seniors. You'll find it in the description below. And if you're ready to take one step forward, just one, leave a comment saying, "I believe," because sometimes belief is where it all begins. Choose one small thing to try today. Will it be the carrot soup or the kale smoothie? You choose, one or two. And if you'd like to walk this journey with me, hit like, share this with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Because next week, we're talking about the 3 breakfast mistakes that could quietly be stealing your strength. Until then, may your mornings be soft, and your eyes always find the light.